Good morning, everyone. My name is Maya Kranich. I'm the chair of the Refugee Council of Australia, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this, our second webinar for 2022. So to begin with, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of Darug land from where I speak and pay my respects to Indigenous elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to introduce you now to Uncle Des, who has pre-recorded a welcome to country for us to use today. Uncle Des is a Darug elder born in the Gully at the Blue Mountains. He was moved to a mission in Granville when he was about 10 years old, along with his sisters. He attended the local school and started his trade as a blacksmith on the railways. As an elder, Uncle Des has done a lot of court support, police liaison, and support for young people going through the justice system. He taught cultural awareness and Aboriginal history for various TAFE colleges, schools, Macquarie University, and the wider community. Uncle Des has been involved in archaeological surveys and has given advice to various government departments on relevant cultural issues. Thank you, Uncle Des. So here is the pre-recorded video. So I'm sorry, we seem to have no sound. We might try that again.
Check out this stuff.
I'd like to acknowledge my ancestors, the traditional owners of the land, and any other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander in the room today. A welcome to country was a part of our dream time. It became a part of our dreaming and become law. And what it is you would wait at my boundaries before you can come on to our land. And you'd send either a message stick, sign with a message stick, or you'd light a fire and we'd see it. The land of the Darug Nation, it starts from Little Hartley up in the mountains, runs along the Bells Line Road to Richmond, along the Colo River to Brooklyn, from Brooklyn along the Hawkesbury, all the way down to Hornsby, into the Sydney Basin. From the Sydney Basin to the mouth of the Georges River, and it runs all the way out to Liverpool, Campbelltown, Aspen, Camden, and back up along the Nepean River, all the way up to the mountains. There was 36 clans, 132 dialects. So tonight, or today, whatever, I'm welcoming you all to the Darug Nation. So welcome everyone.
Thank you to Uncle Des. So this is the second webinar in 2022 in a series that replaces the two-day Refugee Alternatives conferences that we held annually before the pandemic. Our focus continues to explore alternatives to refugee policy, practice and public support. We're pleased that these webinars have reached a new and expanded audience, and in fact, we have had several overseas registrations. This particular webinar will explore the critical and important role refugee community organisations have in protection and integration. Our panel today includes experts with lived experience who will talk about the ways that they respond to the ever-changing challenges, hopes and aspirations of their communities, and how we can better acknowledge, support and amplify the strengths within these community networks. Our speakers today include Nadal Amir from the Mandarin Women's Union in Australia, Katarina Ardu, Australian Federation of Ukrainian Organisations, Fatma Mohammed, Somali Welfare and Cultural Centre, and Yasmina by Rakhtarevich Hayward, President of Refugee Council of Australia and Community Services Coordinator from New South Wales Starts. First, some basic housekeeping. This Zoom webinar is being recorded. It will be made available after this session on the Refugee Council's website. An email will be sent to all registered attendees notifying them when it's available. Please use the Q&A feature in Zoom if you need assistance from the RECOA team. You can also ask the panel questions using this Q&A feature. The panel will have time to respond to questions at the end of all the presentations. You can type your questions into the chat while the panelists are speaking, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible. Also, tag us on the social media channel that you're using with the hashtag #AltRefugee, capital A, capital R. Now, a few words about Refugee Week. This webinar coincides with Refugee Week, which, as you can see from my background slide, is held from the 19th to the 25th of June 2022. Refugee Week is Australia's peak annual activity to inform the public about refugees and celebrate positive contributions made by refugees to Australian society. It provides a platform where positive images of refugees can be promoted in order to create a culture of welcome throughout the country. The aim of the celebration is to create better understanding between different communities and to encourage successful integration, enabling refugees to live in safety and to continue making a valuable contribution to Australia. The theme for 2022 Refugee Week is healing. The importance of human connections has been underscored by the pandemic and the lessons we've learned about the importance of human connections. This theme of healing is a reminder that regardless of our differences, we all share a common humanity. In 2022, we encourage organisations and individuals to visit our website for Refugee Week resources and events that will facilitate healing through celebration. Let's make 2022 much more than just a footnote in the pandemic years. Let's heal together and emerge a more fulfilled and connected society. So now I'd like to acknowledge our sponsors for 2022. Refugee Week is only made possible each year because of the incredible organisations that support it. Thank you so much to Settlement Services International, SSI, and Canva for coming on board as event partners in 2022. Thank you also to our principal partner, SBS Food, and major partners, City of Sydney, Multicultural New South Wales, and Multicultural Australia. Our event partners, Canva, have been busy preparing a whole lot of exciting new designs to help communities all over Australia show their support for Refugee Week and make refugees feel welcome. The designs are also an opportunity for refugee communities to feed back on what Refugee Week means to them. Canva have designed 36 templates, and you can see one in the background here. You can see that it has a very positive and wonderful kind of message. Each template can be customized for your event and for your celebrations. The templates are available on the Refugee Week website on the RECOA webpage. So now I'd like to introduce our first speaker from the Mandarin Women's Union in Australia, Nadal Amir. Nadal came to Australia from Iraq with her husband and 4 children in 2005 after applying for a humanitarian entrance visa. The family fled Iraq because of the religious discrimination against members of the Mandarin community. Nadal is employed by CORE Multicultural Services as a settlement worker, supporting newly arrived refugees and humanitarian entrants from Iraq, and continues her work with Settlement Services International in case management. She established the Mandarin Women's Union in Australia in 2006 and continues to work in supporting her local community, empowering women and young people through capacity building and self-representation, ensuring that the voices of refugees are at the centre of advocacy and policy. Nadal will speak about the work of the Mandarin Women's Union in Australia and how this work supports the community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this beautiful introduction. Dear, thanks. The Mandarin community. Next slide, please. Who are the Mandarin? Sabian Mandarin community, an ethno-religion community found in Baghdad and in the south of Iraq, particularly on the river bank of Euphrates and Tigris, and in the south of Iran around the Karun River. The Mandarin community population worldwide is approximately 100,000 Mandarin around the world. Next slide, please. Mandarin language is related to the holy book, Genz Rabba. The Mandarin language is called Mandaic and is a member of the Aramic family of Delicate. The majority of Mandarin people do not speak this language due to the ongoing persecution and government political in Iraq and Iran. Next, please. Religion. Mandarins recognize several prophets, among whom Yahya or Yohanna, John the Baptist, is the accorded a special status higher than his role in Christianity and Islam. Mandarins do not consider John the Baptist to be the founder of their religion, but revere him as one of their greatest teachers, tracking their belief back to Adam. Next, please. Mandarin population, approximately 6,000 in Iraq now, and Iran 6,000 as well. But the other Mandarin left their countries and settled in Sweden, nearly 5,000, Germany, Denmark, Canada, USA, nearly 2,000, Jordan 750, the Netherlands, United Kingdom 1,000, Norway, New Zealand, Australia, nearly 11,000. It's not corrected. Syria, there is 11,000. Sorry, and in Turkey, nearly 2,000 Mandarin still there waiting for a settled. Were they settled in Australia? Most of the community settled in Sydney, few families in Perth, Adelaide, and Melbourne. Next, please. What is the community organization? Sabian Mandarin Association established 20 years ago. The Mandarin Community House, the Cultural Club Association, the Mandarin Women's Union, the Mandarin Future for Mandarin Youth. Next, please. Diaspora and extinctions. Mandarin community in Iraq faced extinctions. Mandarin immigration from Iraq being during Saddam Hussein's rules, but accelerated greatly after the American invasion in 2003. Mandarin is a specific and provides its adherents from carrying weapons. We don't carry weapons at all. We are very peaceful people. Next, please. Assimilation, suffering in society, actually a lot, including killing, rape, kidnapping, compelling Mandarins to convert to the Muslim religions, confessing belongings, money, goals, houses, shops, women's, girls, everything. Next, please. Mandarin shelters and refugees, they are just running away from Iraq to neighbors countries such as Jordan, Syria, Turkey, Yemen, Libya, as well. There is some people in Indonesia. Next, please. Customs and traditional family are very strong sense of community. Marriage must be within relative, religious as well as a civil, very close community. Children aren't encouraged to live with the parents anymore, related to the changing rules, life rules. Next, please. Baptism at the age of 30 days, grandfather should be present. At the age of 5 and 4, no limit to Mandarin baptism, as it is repeated in adulthood, a way to wash our sins. Anytime you like to go to make baptism, it is open to you. Next, please. Attitude with disability. The Mandarins in Iraq used to treat their children as a taboo, but the Mandarins in Australia now is different vision of disability, learn to deal with the disability through accessing the river services and help them a lot. Next, please. Women are very important in Mandarin community and religion. Women are very respected and loved. No violence against women is allowed. Violence against women is shamed by the whole community. Next, please. Extended family, parents and the grandparents play an important role in family and the children's life. Children always rely on parents and extended family even after marriage. So beautiful grandfather, grandmother, you know, very beautiful feeling. Next. A proactive community provides support to community members when they lost family in or outside of Iraq or in the whole world. Organize information sessions to increase community knowledge and to encourage members to take care of their health and well-being and improve access to the services as well. Next, please. Settlement issues and problems facing Mandarin women. Actually, trauma related to the health issues, mental, emotional and physical, isolation, family separation, integrational breakdowns, housing affordability, lack of access to culturally appropriate services, employment due to the lack of local experience. Actually, there is language barriers and a lot of issue as well. Thank you. Next, please. Achievement, Mandarin Women Unions and Mandarin Association and the another association, Cultural Club and the Community House, Mandarin House. Most of them, they are provide information session to the community, but specifically this is for the Mandarin Women Union experience for better physical health. So swimming, teaching swimming and swimming and eco as well. Women's general health, healthy food, healthy eating habits, art therapy to manage stress and depression by exhibitions and these things, workshops, yoga, quitting smoking, parenting skill in Australia, domestic violence, and the law shops as well for community leaders and religious leaders, social activities including ongoing reduced isolation, Mandarin classes, learning Aramaic, the mother language as well, and it's a lot as well of activities. Imagine that we have two groups for the Mandarin Women Union, one in Fairfield, one in Liverpool, and each week before pandemic, every week we have activities in both area, and imagine how much we offer to the Mandarin Women activities. Next, please. Thank you. If anyone have a question, just send it or write it by chat. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Nadal.
Thanks.
If people have questions of Nadal, please put them in the chat and we will try and see if we can answer them at the end of all the presentations. Thank you, Nadal.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
So I'd like to now introduce you to our next speaker, Katarina Ardu. Nadal, can you turn off your video, please?
Yeah. I'm just.
Thank you very much, Maya. If you don't mind, I will share my screen.
Yes. So Katarina is an investment analyst at Maple Brown Abbott MBA, a leading Australian fund manager with over 10 billion in assets under management. Katarina is responsible for the firm's real estate portfolio. Prior to working at MBA, Katarina was the head of Australian real estate equities research at Credit Suisse. Katarina was born in Ukraine, spent her childhood in Canada, and moved to Australia 10 years ago. She graduated with honours from the George Washington University and the London School of Economics. In her volunteering capacity, Katarina is co-chair of the Australian Federation of Ukrainian Organisations, AFUO, and a co-founder and New South Wales representative of the Australian Ukraine Chamber of Commerce, AUCC. Katarina will speak about the work of the Ukrainian community and how this has changed due to the war in Ukraine. Thank you, Katarina.
Thank you very much, Maya. Okay, hopefully this will work. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Right. All right. Thank you very much for the opportunity to address the webinar today and to provide a little overview of the Ukrainian community and how it's been responding to the displaced people that have arrived from Ukraine as a result of Russia's war against Ukraine. So the topics that I would like to cover today are how and why the Ukrainian community here in Australia is supporting displaced people from Ukraine. Are there any gaps in the type of support that's being supported? What type of support does the actual community that's already here, what type of support do they need? And how has our structured Ukrainian community in Australia changed over the past 12 months? So just to provide a little bit of background in terms of who the Australian Federation of Ukrainian Organizations is and what we do. So the AFUO is a peak body, a national peak body for 22 community organizations throughout Australia. We represent 22 community organizations that include state community organizations, churches, youth, women's organizations, a credit cooperative, as well as educational, language, and other organizations. From the point of view of the Australian government, the AFUO is widely regarded as the spokesbody on matters concerning the Ukrainian community here in Australia and also matters between Australia and Ukraine. And in terms of numbers, also for a little bit of context, according to the latest census, which is a little bit dated, was in 2016, there were about 48,000 Ukrainians in Australia. So in terms of the how and why, let's start with some numbers and some statistics. So the most recent numbers that we received from the Department of Home Affairs as of June 1st, 2022, we had approximately just over 8,000 temporary visas that have been issued. So just so you're aware, with the Ukrainian situation, because how quickly the war escalated and involved in Ukraine, what the AFUO agreed with the Australian government was that first, our priority was to get people to safety as quickly as possible. And the fastest way to do that was to suggest that Ukrainians apply for a tourist visa. Ukrainians have been put in a priority queue globally. So sometimes these visas can be processed in a matter of hours or 24 to 48 hours. Temporary tourist 600 visas are issued. So we have about 8,000 of those that have been issued already. Out of that cohort, about 3,200 people have already arrived. And once they get on shore, the process is for them to apply for a 449 temporary humanitarian visa, which then gets transferred to a 786 visa, which is valid for 3 years. So the difference between the visas, obviously a tourist 600 visa is just a regular tourist visa. So there's no access to anything basically. Whereas the 449 allows full work rights and also access to special benefits through Centrelink. And then once people transition to the 786 visa, that's when they also get access to Medicare. So have a lot more support from the Australian government. How did we approach the situation? So as soon as we knew that Ukrainian displaced people were obtaining the visas and coming to Australia, we actually had difficulties pinning them down and figuring out where these people were going. Some of them, the initial cohort of people that arrived had family connections or friend connections here. So they would arrive usually in Sydney or Melbourne, and their families would take care of them. Then as those family connections, people with family connections arrived and more people started to arrive that didn't necessarily have the same strong connections, that's where they really started to rely on the community for a level of support. And because we realized that the government also had difficulty trying to tell us who's coming from Ukraine and who's a displaced person just because they were coming on a tourist visa, what we decided to do was to reach out to all the major international airports in Australia and ask them if they could put up signs with a QR code and a link to our website, where, as you can see in the top right-hand corner, it said there's a Ukrainian flag. This is in the baggage collection area at Sydney Airport. There's a Ukrainian flag to attract attention. There's a QR code that says welcome and Vitaimo in Ukrainian to grab attention of the people that were coming through the airport, so they could scan the QR code, take them to ukrainians.org.au, which is a new platform that we created with contact details of people that they can contact in each state, and also a series of other support services that we as a community were able to provide. So that helped us reach out to to people initially when they enter the country. Then what we noticed was, again, because Ukrainian displaced people didn't come on a traditional refugee or humanitarian visa pathway, they did not have the access to the typical humanitarian settlements providers that the HSP service providers provide. So whether it's accommodation, meeting at the airport, or the myriad of other support functions that organizations like SSI and AIMS provide, these Ukrainians that were on Tourist 600 visas did not have access to that. So what we did as a community very quickly is we tried to figure out how to fill that gap. The route that we took was we created this national database, again, on this website that we've created specifically for displaced people that come from Ukraine, ukrainians.org.au. There were two forms, basically saying, I'm a Ukrainian national, I'm coming to Australia and I need help with accommodation, or I'm an Australian resident and I would like to provide accommodation. Initially, it started with tens of people filling out those forms, and we were quite encouraged by it. In a matter of weeks, we had over 2,500 Australians that put their hand up saying, I would like to assist with providing accommodation for these displaced Ukrainians that are coming. And from the Ukrainian side, we had about 400 people that registered saying that they need help with a roof over their head. So as you can see, between 400 that requests that we received and the 2,500 offers, the Australian population and general public has been incredibly generous, offering their homes and their help, which we were just blown away by that type of support. So aside from the immediate needs of having a roof over your head, there were also needs for basic things like, for example, most people that arrived had to pack a small suitcase in a matter of hours and figure out how to get to the border because all commercial flights in Ukraine stopped operating. No airplanes could fly over the territory of Ukraine. So people had to figure out how to get to neighboring countries, sometimes by car, sometimes on foot, and then buy their tickets to go to Australia as one of the places, for example. So because they usually arrived with very little to their name, they needed basic things like clothing, hygiene items, linen, bedding, things like that, which they obviously weren't able to pack with them. So in order to address that issue, the established community centers that we as a Ukrainian community have in most capital cities across Australia quickly turned into displaced persons hubs. So, and also turned into donation centers. So anyone that was willing to donate anything, whether it was clothes, food vouchers, baby items, were directed to these centers in the capital cities. And not only were donations then collected there, it very quickly formed as a hub for meet and greets. So for example, in Sydney, every Saturday at 10 o'clock, we have a meet and greet where displaced people from Ukraine can come, socialize, have some tea, coffee, snacks. We also have the donation center that's there so they could pick up any necessary items that they require. And also it's an opportunity to have service providers like SSI, STARTS, different people that wanted to provide information to our newly arrived Ukrainians. They were able to do that at this hub in one place. So it proved to be quite useful. In addition to providing physical aid in terms of accommodation and clothes and food, we also very quickly, after the beginning of the full-scale war, launched a fundraising campaign called Ukraine Crisis Appeal. Ukraine Crisis Appeal has existed since 2015, but as soon as the war broke out, there was a lot more interest in donating to Ukraine and assisting. So to date, through the Ukraine Crisis Appeal, we have raised over $4.5 million, which has been a phenomenal response from not only the Australian community, Australian corporates. We've also had state governments that have donated large sums of money. For example, the Queensland government donated 500,000. The West Australian government also donated 500,000 recently to Ukraine Crisis Appeal. So we've received an incredible amount of support, and that money, that fund is done in partnership with Rotary Club. So they provide a tax deductible structure, and 100% of that money then goes to directly humanitarian aid in Ukraine. Because we've raised quite a bit of money for direct humanitarian aid for Ukraine, and we again had a little bit of a gap in terms of providing support services to the displaced people that arrived from Ukraine here in Australia. In discussions with Rotary Club, we managed to create a second fund. It's called the Resettlement Fund, and any money raised through that, again, is tax deductible, but it goes directly towards helping displaced people in Australia. And we've raised almost $200,000 in that fund. Another major initiative that we had was also liaising with the media. So we had an incredible amount of interest in the situation in Ukraine from also media channels, whether it's TV channels, printed media, newspapers. And we have a dedicated media liaison from the AFUO. Her name is Nadia Menchinsky. Literally works around the clock responding to any sort of media requests. And it also helps to provide an update in terms of what's going on, not only in the community, but a lot of these people that have come from Ukraine, the majority of them are women and children, as men aged 16 to 60 could not leave the country due to martial law. So these displaced women and children, and mostly elderly as well, are able to provide an update when speaking to the media what's actually happening back home in Ukraine, what's happening to their family, their husbands, brothers that they've left behind. So that media liaising has been incredibly important in our community. Addressing the gaps. So I can say that we have been very fortunate as a community to have incredible support of the Australian government. We've had really good communication channels, really good response, and we're able to sort issues out quickly. Unfortunately, we do have a major gap at the moment, and that is in respect to medical check fees. So as I mentioned previously, the way that the Ukrainian displaced people arrive here, they arrive on the tourist visas, and then they transition to the 449 temporary humanitarian visa. In order to transition from the 449 to the 786, which is the 3-year humanitarian visa, there is a medical check that's involved. And that is done through Bupa as a medical service provider. And these fees can cost anywhere from $330 to $430 per person. So if you have a mother with 2 children, for example, right away overnight, she has to find over $1,000 to pay for these medical check fees. And that's not including accommodation, food costs, basic living costs. So that's proven to be a huge burden, not only on the displaced people that have arrived, but also on the community, because then you have the host families or friends, relatives, anyone that is willing to help, trying to come up with large sums of money to undertake these medical check fees. And if the medical checks are not performed, then the displaced people from Ukraine cannot move from the 449 to the 786, which means that they do not have access to Medicare until that transition process is completed. So unfortunately, we've had a case, for example, where a mother had a child that needed their adenoids removed, and she could not do that because she couldn't get access to a GP, she couldn't get access to a hospital to perform the surgery, and she didn't even have money for the medical check fees, never mind all the other healthcare needs that are after that. And especially in a time where it's quite severe flu season. I know I've recently been sick. Everyone that I know has recently been sick. So having access to GPs and just basic healthcare is incredibly important at this point in time. So we're trying to work both with Bupa and the Department of Home Affairs to find a solution to that now. But I would say that that's the biggest gap currently in our community. I won't go through the others in as much detail, just because I've already touched on them. So initially, Obviously, the HSP service providers provide accommodation, short-term accommodation, and help transition to long-term accommodation. But in the meantime, when people are on a Tourist 600 visa, there's that gap. So we've created that national database where we do the matching between the requests and the offers. We've also addressed basic needs and life skills through the donation centers and the resettlement fund that we've raised over just about 200,000 there, which will go towards things like driving lessons, swimming lessons. Most people don't know how to swim from Ukraine. Most people don't know how to drive on the, as they call it, the wrong side of the road here. So these are all really important life skills that we would like to support in for these displaced people to achieve. The next step after people have a roof over their head and settle in and get their kids into schools is we've also formed an employment team and an employment jobs portal where we have over 100 companies that have reached out to us already. I think the number is 102 or 103 now, where we have created this, again, national database and portal where companies can say, look, we have these job positions. We would really like to assist the Ukrainian community and fill these spots and also employ Ukrainians. So that's been working really well. Again, also in partnership with the HSP service providers. We have been able to work very closely with them and also identify the skills that the community has and the needs that are being sent over our way in terms of companies requesting assistance with employment. The type of support that our community needs at this stage is with the change in government and new leadership in place. The biggest support that our community needs is opening up those communication channels and reestablishing relationships that we had with the previous government. I can't stress how important that is because if we have issues, we need to know who to go to and how to resolve them. As I mentioned before, media outreach is incredibly important for our community just to raise awareness about the war that continues to go on. I know Ukraine has left the headlines and is not front page news anymore, but that doesn't change the unimaginable suffering and pain that people are going through right now. We also have rallies all across Australia. Sydney is quite active where not only do we advocate for support, but it's also a way to gather in one place and to provide moral support for each other, because a lot of our community members have family that is stuck in Ukraine and are going through the daily anxiety, worry, and pain of something happening to them, of them being injured, of not being able to get the type of medical care or access that they need simply because hospitals are being bombed in Ukraine. So it's incredibly important for our community to feel that support, even if it's moral support. You'd be surprised how far that goes. So we've, as an example, have been working on an initiative to change the name of a street where the Russian consulate's located in Sydney, from Fullerton Street to Ukraine Street. It might seem like a small token, but for the Ukrainian community here, as well as Ukrainians back home, that could mean the difference between staying strong morally and suffering immensely. So if they feel a level of moral support from all the way across the world, like Australia, it goes a long way. And some of the advocacy that we're working on that the Ukrainian community really needs support on is the things that we've been speaking about for several months now. That's military, medical, humanitarian aid, initiatives like diplomatic isolations, boycotting Russia, sending a strong signal and message through companies exiting the Russian market, saying that they don't support the war that Russia's waging against Ukraine, and basically exiting a market where taxes are being paid to fund a war machine. So those are the types of support that the community needs. And lastly, how has it changed our community? I won't read all of this, but I'll just summarize it in a sense that in the Ukrainian community, there has been an old established community that has been here for generations, usually born in Australia, but have some sort of Ukrainian heritage. Then there has been this new wave of more recent arrivals, whether it's for work, marriage, other reasons that people have arrived in Australia more recently. And those two communities have usually been, I don't want to say quite separate, but they haven't worked as closely together. What this war in Ukraine has done, and the arrival of the displaced people from Ukraine, is that it has really galvanized both groups and united them to support Ukraine and Ukrainians. So I don't remember and can't say that I've ever seen this level of unity, probably not only in Australia, but globally, because it's really a situation of right and wrong, black and white. There's really no gray area in this war. So that has probably been the biggest change in our community. And lastly, as my final remarks, just would like to, if there's one message that I can leave you with, is please don't forget about Ukraine. It's really hell on earth right now. It's the brutality and the force that is being used by the Russian army against Ukrainian civilians, mothers, children. It's unbearable to watch, and it hasn't gone away. So just because it's not front page headline news doesn't mean that it's gone away. So please speak up in any way that you can, act and help. Any help would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Katarina, if you stop, yes. Thank you, Katarina. That was incredibly informative and very detailed. Thank you. Our next speaker is Fatma Mohammed. Fatma is a community worker with qualifications in community development and social welfare. For over 25 years, she has worked with the new and emerging communities in numerous roles in NGOs in both local and state government. As a volunteer, Fatma works tirelessly for the well-being of African women and children. She's the co-founder of Somali Welfare and Cultural Association, SWCA, a voluntary community organisation that works towards building community capacity for African refugees and migrants in Western Sydney. For Fatma, working with refugees is a passion that enriched her life. She will talk about the work of Somali welfare in supporting women and how this contributes to the well-being of the community. Thank you, Fatma.
Thank you, Maya, and hello, everybody, and thank you for your time today. I too would like to acknowledge the Wakabo nation and people. I pay my respect to traditional custodians and First Peoples, and I acknowledge their continual connection to their country and culture. So thank you for the invite. I'll just let you know a little bit about Somali Welfare and Cultural Association. So the association is a voluntary not-for-profit community organization established in 2001. We work with culturally diverse communities across Western Sydney. We operate with skilled volunteers, mostly women, and employ project-based staff from time to time to support the work of the organization. So our vision is for an inclusive world where refugee families are supported to rebuild their lives, reach their full potential, and contribute to their communities. Our mission is to promote and support community-based initiatives so communities can participate and have an active role and sort of control their own activities. We have a strong focus on projects that have social and community development outcomes, with emphasis on supporting new arrivals, refugees, and migrants in the settlement process, and providing them links to the broader Australian community. So who are our people? The vast majority of the Somalis started to arrive here as refugees in 1991 following the outbreak of the civil war and collapse of the government. Many came to Australia as single women with children and may experience ongoing challenges of settlement due to the post-migration stresses, language barriers, unemployment, housing, and most importantly, the news reports of continuing violence in Somalia, where people continuously arrive on spouse visas and many who have been here for a number of years still seeking asylum. So as said, we've got a proportion of female-headed household, while an average household in the Somali community is larger than the mainstream population. The burdens of war, dislocation, remain despite the collective desire for everyone to forget, to settle, to get on with it, and try to get their family out of those refugee camps. There are more Somalis living outside Somalia or across the world. The real experience of displacements, dislocation, isolation, and marginalization come crashing down on individuals and the whole communities in terms of settlement processes. Many are hardworking, they do shift work to try and support both their families here and the ones left behind who are constantly at risk. They continue to advocate for their families, and policies like DNA testing of African communities are not helpful in that they inherently question the foundation of the family formation that don't really adhere to the Western nuclear family. These concerns are really crucial in considering the well-being of the individual and the community. And of course, the cohesion of refugee communities is intimately linked to the rights of family sponsorship without being emotionally scarred in the process. So we've got people who've lived here 20 years and are still trying to get their families here. Our projects, so we've got the Women's AIDS Group. It's a budding system to support isolated women, particularly those who've lost partners, husband, have been abused, or are single parents. The program helps women to connect with others in a safe environment and helps to put them in contact with relevant services. And that was the first projects we started with because all the women just needed the connection. The family conflict and cultural counseling. It's an important service for families experiencing cultural change through settlement. And most of the time it's about family violence and intergenerational conflict are the main issues normally. We've got the Bridging the Gap program. It's just an awareness and education program that provides understanding of Australian laws and system. A lot of people want to know, a simple thing is, why did I get an infringement? I wasn't speeding, so we've just got to go and explain how the rules work. We also coordinate the annual African Festival, which is one of the largest theme African festival in Australia. The festival is community-led with a volunteer community of African women from different parts of Africa. We also have the Youth Mentoring Project, which is about career goals and mentoring youth and supporting them to search and apply for jobs, internships, and volunteer roles. And this includes, I suppose we're all aware of the barriers to employment for young people from CAL background, refugees, both first and second generation. Our issue currently is we've got young people who finish university degrees are unable to find jobs. We must say COVID hasn't helped. So we continue to discuss the barriers and to build networks, including, understanding, what the young people are talking about and what their needs are. Why do we do this work? And for us, it's important that we bridge the cultural gap. Many people feel lost when they arrive here. Many seek what is familiar to help them understand their new status in this new country and want to draw on strengths from their shared experiences, language, and culture understanding. Our services are informed by our culture strength-based and trauma-informed approach. We have established a strong links to provide safe spaces for women and children across our services. And also we have the ability to provide innovative and flexible approach to positive and meaningful change. Because the Somalis have been displaced for generations and many of us have been born outside of the country, our work is to ensure that we still have the brightest possible future for families and that they understand the new system they're in. Definitely, when we started, there was this feeling of communities and individuals feeling intimidated. They found that various people were lecturing them. They were coming to us and telling us we should pray whenever we want to. Just because I'm attending class, that doesn't mean that I can't do my prayer. That is what they call the freedom of belief and freedom of living behind that old life. So for them, prayer is a way of life. So simple things like that and just changing and, supporting them so that a 5-minute prayer wasn't a big deal either way. Somali, I was very interested to hear Nadia talk about women are very respected in her communities. For Somali women, they are expected to submit to men and to fulfill their duties as daughters, wives, and moms. So that's the 3 roles you have. And with those 3 roles comes a huge responsibility. Obviously, we have the clashes between parents over culture values is also a frequent thing for us. We do this work too because we've built networks and communicated with we can communicate with elders, religious leaders, agency, knowing that this collaboration and responses and relationships lead to better outcomes for the communities. Additionally, we under cultural knowledge and sensitivities to work with vulnerable and marginalized groups and ensure that our services are responding to their needs. Our strengths and gaps, women volunteers. We've got 100% membership of women volunteers. They're very strong, very capable. So when it comes to culture, women are responsible for the well-being of the family. Even though their role have been defined into those 3 roles, they are the backbone of the family. Our work is valued, communities keep coming back. Obviously, we have the ongoing pressure to support other groups. There's the lack of experts and network to support African refugees and migrants. The ongoing social challenges such as housing, cost of living, employment, accessing NDIS, women and children escaping family violence, youth at risk. So throughout the years, we find that every year or every so often there's new challenges. I took a long while for the community to understand disability and how you work with the family or what supports are available. And there's this great NDIS at the moment, but the access to it for community is really making it hard for access. Working with partners as the years go by, we find that a lot of our partners outsource their projects to other people, and that obviously makes it hard for us to start from zero and try to explain to them what the community is about. Obviously, user pay system for welfare is really creeping into our systems. The digital world, everything is online. You hardly can find a phone number or an email. All you do is now use the digital world. So that's becomes complicated for the family. And of course, we don't have any ongoing funding. So I suppose what we require or what supports we'd love to have is to start off a bit of respect and proper engagement. I think for everyone, it's really critical that we meet halfway. Community engagements need to be founded upon trust and respect. We do engage people who are invested in projects which are creative, flexible, inclusive, respectful, that come from within. Eventually, you know, community projects must aim to facilitate better intercommunal and intergeneration relationship and gender relationship. Support with ongoing research. Currently, we have situations where people want to see evidence. And with that evidence, they need to be research done. And it's very hard sort of to find anyone who wants to do the research because there's no funding or no money, whatever the issue is. We find there's very little research, like when it comes to cult, domestic violence. People have been here for 20 years or so. There must be more research in that. Meaningful training session or forums that meet the needs, and most importantly is affordable. The communities don't have money. We need training, but they must be meaningful. So again, it's a halfway for us. Pro bono volunteers, like the skills that the gaps we have is, we'd love to hear from lawyers, social media people, or grant writers. And of course, all small organizations should be properly funded for the refugee communities. Our partnership and framework established on collaboration. And I suppose in talking about this, what comes to mind is in regards to COVID the last 2 years, I think the refugee communities and organizations were the first responders. They worked very well with their communities. They were the first people to get in there and support the government. I remember at one stage through Multicultural New South Wales, that's how health was dealing with the community, and the small communities quickly went into action. And we're hoping that, you know, there is some work or some frame that happens, because those small communities really do matter and they do fill a gap that's lacking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fatma. So once again, a very detailed and very interesting presentation. So now I'd like to introduce you to our final speaker, Yasmina Rakhtarevich Hayward. She came to Australia in 1993 as a refugee from Bosnia-Herzegovina. She's a social worker, a university medalist, and the community services coordinator at STARTS. Yasmina's involvement in the refugee field dates back to 1991, when she became involved in work with Bosnian refugees in Croatia through the Sankokret Center for Grassroots Relief Work, an implementing partner of United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Yasmina commenced her work at STARTS in the position of Counsellor Project Officer for the Communities of former Yugoslavia in 1994, and remained in the position until 1999, when she took on the role of a team leader at Singleton Safe Haven. She's been in the position of Community Services Coordinator since 2000. Her knowledge and expertise range from individual trauma counselling through group work and community development to management and staff supervision. Yasmina is the current president of the Refugee Council of Australia.
Thank you, Maya. Shall I share my screen?
You shall.
I shall, and there you go. From the beginning. See if this works. There you go. So, as Maya said, my name is Yasmina Rakhtarevich Hayward, and before I go any further, I'd like to also acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land that I'm on, and it's a Cabrogal country of the Darug Nation. I'd also like to pay my respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging, and any First Nations people listening today. You have all seen Uncle Des speak at the start, and I'd like to acknowledge my respect for him personally, and the support that he has given me in putting my roots in this new country. Many of us with refugee background need a way to put the root into the country, and connection with Australian First Nations can enable us to do so. And so yes, I express my gratitude to Uncle Des. Starts, this is what it is. We are the New South Wales Service for the Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture and Trauma Survivors. And I won't go much in terms of giving you information about what Starts does, because many of you probably know that already. And if you don't, get in touch and I'll let you know. I have worked at Starts for a very long time, as you know, and this is the list of the different communities that we have worked with at Starts. And if I was to look at different refugee-led organizations, there'd be probably about 200 or so refugee-led organizations spanning all of the communities listed here of Starts existence from about 1988. We have just started working with Ukrainian community, as Katarina has mentioned, and I have been as impressed as many people would today with the effort that community has put in and the ability to organize themselves and welcome the new arrivals. I have also worked with Somali welfare, with Fatma and Nadal, with the Mandarin Women's Union, and I feel honored to have had a chance to do that. Now, why those of us, Fatma? Why those of us at Starts actually believe that it's important to work with communities and community refugee-led organizations is because trauma, the essence of trauma is a disempowerment and disconnection. And the healing then is about empowerment and connections. And who better to provide the sense of empowerment and develop connections than refugee-led organizations? So just that work, the community work described by Fatma, by Katarina, and by Nadal is the work that facilitates healing. The other thing to acknowledge is the impact of state terrorism and organized violence on refugee communities. And where that takes me is that state terrorism and organized violence deliberately target social relationships and self-belief. They aim to get people to internalize fear and mistrust and to exacerbate or cause fragmentation and polarization in communities. So again, that's connected to the whole theme of trust and connections. When people come to Australia, the same way as post-traumatic stress disorder is not left behind, the same way as depression and anxiety cannot be left behind, similarly, the impact on communities cannot be left behind. And that's why the work with communities is essential. Two concepts that we look at here, and this one in academia, social capital has had both its critics and people who appreciate the concept. In refugee context, this is important because social capital is about relationships between people and relationships of a particular quality that have norms of trust and reciprocity. And it is exactly those relationships, the social capital, that's destroyed by state terrorism and organized violence. And it is exactly that refugee-led organizations are trying to rebuild through many activities they do. And Fatma spoke about strength-based work, which you could also call it asset-based community development. And that's working with the communities to amplify and identify and amplify the strengths that they already have, to help them build on those strengths. And all three speakers before me have illustrated this beautifully. So what do refugee-led organizations do and why they're important? They promote and support the development of community assets. And they're not just the things that are intangible, but the sporting teams, the churches, the schools, the youth centers, they're assets that are assets for their community, but then also later for the wider Australian community. Refugee-led organizations are well placed to support, to provide culturally and linguistically appropriate support in a safe and trusting environment. Because, when you're new to Australia, being supported by someone who speaks your language and understands your culture is essential. They're bridge builders between their communities, but also those organizations serving the wider Australian community, like Starts. Without them, we cannot do what we do. The larger community organizations, we cannot do what we do. They contribute, refugee-led organizations contribute to both creating the intra-community bonding social capital, which means working within your own community and strengthening relationships in your own community, but also bridging social capital with the wider community. I haven't put linking social capital, but it is, again, refugee-led organizations that form the bridge between their community and Australian government and institutions. And apart from the fact that we all have lived experience when we work in organizations that are refugee-led, we also have knowledge, education, skills, and connections that we give to our communities. Refugee-led organizations know their community best, they're resilient, resourcefulness, and have strong drive for survival, and can mobilize significant social capital much better than large service providers often. And again, Katarina has given us example of the mobilized social capital in action. And I've seen Fatma do that in the past as well, and as well as Nadal. Some of the challenges that communities face, and Fatma has again spoken about those: project-based funding, not easy to find core funds. Could lead to volunteer overload and burnout because it is volunteers that are running most of those organizations. Being able to understand and engage with Australian systems and processes and speak the language of bureaucracy and politics. Refugee-led organizations unfortunately compete for resources with larger organizations. And it can be a highly specialized field that engages paid consultants. And again, Fatma was calling for grant writers and social media people. So they're the skills that refugee-led organizations need to progress, but they might not have the access to funding to pay for them. Some of us larger organizations, but also well-meaning allies, we can be found to assume to have legitimacy and permission to speak on behalf of refugee-led organizations. And it's one of those things we need to check in on ourselves on a regular basis. Long-term sustainability, organizational knowledge, there could be challenges with that, particularly if with organizations led by volunteers. Not all volunteers stay around as long as Fatma and Nadal have. The challenges with ensuring diversity and representation internally in some organizations, you know, a presence of women, if they're not women-specific organizations, youth leadership, and people with diverse sexualities, genders, and bodies. And of course, we talked about the impact of exposure to trauma. Sometimes working with organizations that are bigger than them, refugee community organizations worry that we will push our own agenda, whatever that might mean, that we might claim ownership of a joint project in public and media, as well as with the funding bodies, that we will use our power to dictate the content and focus of joint events. I was helping an organization implement a dinner dance, and it was supposed to be a dinner dance, a place of joy and fun. And they were worried that because STARTS was involved to support them, that we'll want to come and talk about the impact of torture at the event. We didn't, but we had to talk about that at the start. They're worried that community expertise will be taken, hijacked, and then used to obtain resources for funding for service providers, or that bicultural staff might not be the ones that they would prefer. Now, I do acknowledge that bicultural staff are incredibly important in working in larger service providers, and that it's a delicate balancing act that staff and organizations have to go through. And of course, refugee-led organizations worry that we will take sides when there's community conflict present. Some lessons I've learned over the years: ownership and control. We do not own the journey. Refugee-led organizations own the journey. We walk alongside and not ahead. We do not lead the process of development. And Fatma talked about ownership and control, and that needs to be discussed early in the engagement. And we need to follow the lead and discuss with refugee-led organizations as utterly equal partners. How do we go about media, promotion, logos? We need to create spaces for refugee-led organizations, and this webinar is doing this, to publicize their work. Same goes with recognition and representation. We need to create spaces for self-representation as opposed to speaking on behalf of people, because we have some incredibly articulate people in refugee-led organizations. We work with communities through helping them identify assets and strengths, and that creates a new story. And all of us can work together to create a new story, an alternate story about who refugees are and who refugee-led organizations are. That often the dominant story is the story of a problem-saturated story. And we need to see diversity. Trust and safety. To establish trust and safety, we need to make sure we are invited. When we get in, when we work with a community organization, we need to be present and available, respond to emails, texts, and be available on different platforms. Trust building is essential, but as is the transparency. And again, discussing ownership early and being open about that contributes to respect, trust, and transparency. Relationships are long-term, be patient. And MOUs can be helpful to clarify as a large organization, how we work together with smaller refugee-led organizations. Again, working on strengths and social capital. We need to be useful in tangible ways, and often my engagement with communities has started with access to Starts bus or a hall, meeting hall. We need to recognize that this work, walking alongside refugee-led organizations, is a process, not a project that stops once the funding runs out. We need to be flexible, and at times it is challenging because our funding bodies have expectations of us, but we need to be able to work and feed back to the funding body so that the community is able to dictate their own journey. We need to improvise, but also we need to learn to transfer our skills. And I guess more important than anything is this self-awareness. Be aware of the skills that you have, and then the skills that you don't, and where you don't have the skills, find someone who does. Cultural safety and trauma-informed practice, and again, Fatma referred to that, starts from you, start a worker. So your emotions, thoughts, and behaviors, and your knowledge and awareness of how your own culture impacts your interaction with people around you and impacts your judgment and thoughts and ideas about the world around you. Be aware of your privilege, which is contextual and intersectional, because privilege doesn't come just from the fact that I work with a large organization. For me specifically, I came to Australia speaking English, I'm white. So I have many layers of privilege, and that's something that I need to be aware of. Sometimes we get anxious about direction of the engagement. Don't be anxious, stick with it. Boundaries are not set in stone, but you need to be aware of them. And again, you need to go back to whose journey it is and what is my responsibility on this journey supporting a refugee-led organization. And we need to be curious and open to learning ourselves. We will learn as much as we teach, and we need to acknowledge that there is as much to learn as there is to teach. So I think that's it. Thank you. I shall stop share and over to Maya.
Thank you, Yasmina, very much. So, after all these very, very interesting presentations, we do have some questions, and I think we have everyone on. Yes, we have everyone. So I have one significant question. I'm just trying to find where the questions are.
There's a great one from Nicole Dean to Katarina.
Yes, that
it says, it's amazing what you've been able to do for the Ukrainian community here. Can you see it, Maya?
Yes, I can. What do you think has allowed you to do this so effectively? And could you share suggestions to make these processes easier for other communities? Okay. Katarina.
May I try and answer?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So it's very difficult to put it into one answer, but what I can say is by far that has been the driving force is that we have formed an incredibly strong team. So the AFUO acts as a national body, but in each state we have state bodies that are member organizations of the AFUO. So we have local presidents of the state bodies that have been able to coordinate the communities, structured communities there. We then advocate on a national basis with government. And I can honestly say that there are hundreds of volunteers that have fallen into these structures. And so because we have had a very good structure in terms of national bodies, state bodies, the message has been very clear and united. So when speaking, whether it's to government bodies or to corporates or to anyone who we are asking to help, they have one clear message, and we have, community goals that are priorities, and we all try to work in the same direction. The strength of the volunteers, I can say we have maybe 100, maybe 200. I can't even put it into numbers, how many volunteers we have working in various directions. So we, as the AFUO, establish what the key priorities are, and then we go out to the community, whether it's through Facebook, whether it's through our mailing list, and we say, these are the things that we're working on. Do we have any skills in that area? And then people put their hands up, they join the teams or the committees that are working on a certain initiative,
and they work only on that one particular task to push it through. So for example, with visas initially, we had the AFUO speaking about we need visas in order to get Ukrainians to safety. So our priority was phase 1, get them to safety, quickest route. Phase 2, how do we get access to support structures and networks? And then phase 3, let's talk about permanent settlement options. But all of that was done in phases. Same with our current or accommodation, for example. What is the problem and who can help us solve it? So we know that we knew we had to fill a gap for a matter of weeks before the HSP service providers came in and did what they do best. But we had IT skills and experts in our community. So we asked, can you help us form a website? And what's the best way to, collect requests and offers? So they created these web forms and we managed a national database. So it's been incredibly helpful having the formal structures that have existed for 60, 70, I don't even know how many years in the community, well established, have worked to create, churches, schools, and build a community. And then we have this incredibly new and active and energized group of young professionals that are highly skilled, are highly motivated, and all they need to know is what direction to work in. So I can say, maybe to summarize it all, that is to have a good structure in place, clear priorities, and to speak to the people to figure out what are their needs and how to work in one direction.
Thank you, Katarina. Now I have a question for Nadal for clarification, and it is, who has the custody of children if they're not allowed to stay with parents? So it's a question for you. Nadal, you're on mute. You need to unmute.
Sorry, dear. Yeah. What is the question, is it?
The question is, why are the children not allowed to stay with their parents? That was a sentence in your PowerPoint presentation about children are not encouraged to stay with parents.
Now in Australia, sometimes some children is like to separated from their family, especially after marriage, before they stay together. This is what we mean. Yeah.
So you're talking about adult children.
Yeah, adult children. Yeah, no, not the children that, I mean, the little age, no.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That's clarified that. I'm just looking to see if there are other questions. There's another one for Katarina. What about kids' vaccination certificates from Ukraine needed for school here?
So the way we've approached vaccination certificates is that, one, there's an issue with translating. So we have worked with New South Wales Health, for example, here in Sydney, that provide free translating services to help translate what's already, what vaccines the children have already received and what's missing. Also, we've tapped into a pretty good network of doctors, GPs that either speak Ukrainian or Russian, so they can read what is actually what vaccinations the children have received, and they can help translate. And then the third issue that we have is sometimes that the vaccines are different, or they don't have the same level of vaccines that are required in Australia. So children are put on what they call a catch-up schedule, and as long as they catch up on those vaccines, obviously they're not going to have it done all in one day, then the children are allowed to attend school. So far it's been okay. We haven't had major issues with that. It's just been the translating, but we've found a way to address that.
Thank you, Katarina. So I have a question for Fatma. What can funding bodies do to make access to funds easier for smaller refugee-led organisations?
I suppose for us is those government agencies need to come down and at least meet and speak directly to the community. Government agencies seem to always speaking to refugee agencies. Like there's a big gap there. They don't come down and say, what is your issue, who you are. They come through other agencies. And because you don't have a history or because you don't have evidence, that's why research is so important. You've just been fluffed away and told, where is the evidence? Give us something written. But so they don't even, when you talk to them across a table, it's like they want more because they don't understand, I suppose. And we get it, but I suppose how do we go around that?
Thank you, Fatma. So it is 1:30. I just have a couple of quick comments. So the first thing is there are a few comments and questions about resources, access to resources. So I think the best way we can deal with that is that if you go to the website of the various organisations, or you've got a question in the chat for particular individuals, we could direct those questions to them. Other than that, there are questions. I'm just asking for guidance. Should we continue? What do we think? I'll just take one more question for Yasmina. What would you advise the new upcoming organisation when considering cultural practice?
I think
So I'm assuming that's an Australian a government or an institutional organisation.
Or is it? Because to me, it sounded more like an organisation that's just established and it's trying to work. Yeah, there's a yes in the chat. Look, I think that's quite a long answer.
Yes.
What I would advise is, and I think learn the first advice, and that's why the person is here, learn from people who have done things like that before. So learn from Fatma, learn from Nadal, and Katarina has given us some ideas about what makes things work. And then talk to someone who does work like I do, and other community development workers in the sector, and have a conversation about your organization, have a conversation about what it is that you want to achieve, where you want to take it, and then discuss what kind of supports that you might need and the strengths that you have that you would like to build on.
Thank you. Thank you.
Learn from people before, find someone to talk to.
Yes, I think that's a message that actually encapsulates everything that we've heard. We've heard some incredibly interesting and informative presentations, and really the messages are, in different words, really all about walking alongside communities, and the empowerment is part of the respect that we pay as settled Australian citizens to support people, not having our own ideas, but walking alongside and supporting the communities who already have the strength, the resilience, the capacity to know what they need and how to support their community, as we've heard from the various presenters. And really, as Fatma said, settlement is a process, not an event. Her presentation showed that it's a process that takes a long time. So thank you to everyone for joining us for this webinar. As I said in the beginning, the webinar will be available on our website, and we'd really appreciate it if you'd complete a feedback survey, which should only take you a couple of minutes. And this feedback will help us prepare future webinars. The link to the survey will be placed in the chat, in the Survey Monkey. It should be, is it already in the chat? Let's have a look. Here it is, complete feedback survey. It will only take you a couple of minutes, I promise. And this helps us decide what topics and what kind of processes to use in future. So thank you very much for joining us, and we hope you can join us in the next webinar. Goodbye, everyone.